Good evening, everyone. You're watching Bharat Voice. I'm Ritika Acharya, and I am live from Bengaluru today. Today, we're joining live so late in India is because we are now connected with a speaker straight from Europe, straight from Czech Republic, Prague, and she is joining with us today because she has written a book, rather a guide to understand and to learn how to take interviews. Now, this is going to be interesting because today we are interviewing about how to take interviews. Her guide is called Ask Great Questions and Get Great Answers. We have with us Veronica Pakova from Prague. Veronica, welcome to Bharat Voice.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Veronica, I'll simply start off by asking and understanding why did you write this book? And why is there a guide now available to understand how to take interviews? Why were you motivated to write this, and what's the reason behind it? It's very intriguing.
So I started doing interviews 7 years ago. Back then, I was working in India. I had an internship in New Delhi, and I worked at the embassy of the Czech Republic there. And I read a fascinating book by Bahar Dutt, who is I don't know if you know her, but she's quite famous Indian journalist. And
Yes.
I decided to interview her.
Ah,
I had no interviewing skills, nothing. I was just a very curious person. And from
hmm.
that interview, I started interviewing basically anyone, who had something interesting to say.
Uh-huh.
But I just followed my gut feeling. Like there wasn't any guide that I could read. I didn't find anything. Usually, when I typed into Google how to do interviews, I could find lots and lots of links to job interviews, but almost
Yeah, yeah.
no links to journalism interviews. And so
Right.
I thought, wow, there is really no book, so let me gather a few years of
Hmm.
experience and then put all my know-how into this book. And that's what I did. I did plenty of interviews over the course of the last 7 years, and then I put all the knowledge that I have about conducting interviews into the book.
But tell me, Veronica, you have been a journalist, you've been a writer for 7 years. But then for 7 years, because I was reading your book, that you have done varied interviews. You haven't really stuck to one topic, and you haven't really stuck to one kind of interview or one kind of a speaker. You've done interviews in different topics. Doesn't that really confuse a viewer, or doesn't that really confuse, let's say, a follower or someone who's reading a book as to, I want to stick to only one particular thing, and she's gone around and interviewed everyone? Or maybe you learn something out of it which you can share.
It totally does. And you're so right that it confuses your readers, followers, listeners. So I'm not sure whether I would advise people to do all types of interviews with basically anybody. It's a great approach for the person, like for the journalist, because you learn about anything in the world, but not
Yes.
so much for your readers. So but the thing is that I also worked as a copywriter. So I had clients, and I did interviews for their websites, for their blogs. So I did interviews, and based on that wrote articles about startups, about entrepreneurship, but also about sustainability. So it didn't matter that much because it wasn't all on my blog. But maybe, like, if anyone's listening to us and considering doing interviews, then I would advise them to have a focus, maybe not just on once. There doesn't have to be just one single area, like for example gardening or space technology or knitting or handiwork, but you can basically have some connecting motive, or something that connects people from very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Maybe these are interviews about courage. These are interviews about how people struggle through life and then they achieve something. So those can be interviews with gardeners and engineers and so on. But it's good to have something that connects them so that the
So you're
people
saying
can.
Sorry. So you're saying that basically you had that sort of an approach. You particularly, it worked for you. You had that sort of an approach where you took interviews about various topics and stuff. Because I can understand it, Veronica, because that's something I do, and that's something I've tried to achieve with Bharatwise. Because I've tried to interview on every topic, be it let's say environment, or be it about travel, or be it about political affairs, or be it about temples, or anything for that matter. So I understand that approach because it's great for a journalist. It's great for people like us. But then sometimes it could confuse the reader. But if it helps, and if you're listening to us right now, because there are people who are live watching us, if it helps you, if you want to take interviews, or if you want to learn from Veronica's book, try to have a focus. That will probably help you in your initial stages. All right. So now let's move on to about your book. Can you try and explain to me in simple words, let's say in 3 key steps, or let's say in 4 to 5 key steps, what is the perfect guide to taking a good interview?
Okay, so you should start with selecting an interesting personality. I think that's very important, because there are some people who seem to be interesting based on how they talk, but maybe like in that book, I explained that there are 4 types of people. It's not my typology, it's by someone else, but basically there are people who are really interesting, but maybe they are not so good at expressing themselves. There are people who are interesting and are good at expressing themselves, which is just a perfect match. And then there are people who don't have much to say, but they're really good talkers. So it seems like, wow, these are so interesting people. But if you ask them really in-depth questions, then there is not much there. And the last category is people who don't have much to say and they can talk. So you won't probably interview them. The first step is to really choose a person that you admire, or maybe someone whose book you read, or who you know, really someone you admire. Then the next step is to do an in-depth research of that person. So really look what they wrote or what they said, or look at their work, at their website. Really do spend. Yes, you wanted to ask?
Basically try to understand their personality. Are you saying trying to gauge as to what sort of people they are?
Exactly, yes. So once you sorry?
Please go on. It's interesting. Please go on.
So once you've picked that interesting person and studied, then you should create good questions. So while you're doing a research on that person, you can jot down any questions that come to your mind, and maybe you think that some of them are stupid, or someone else has already asked these questions, but just write down anything. You can have one page of questions, or 2 or 3. It doesn't. You can cross the less interesting ones and really focus on the ones that are original or unique, original, and so on. And then once you're doing that interview, it's good to listen a lot to what the person says. So now I'm talking a lot, so it seems like, oh, I'm just such a talkative person. But when you're doing the interview, it's really good to listen to that person.
Yes.
So these are 4 steps. I'm sure that there are many more, but that's what comes to my mind now.
All right. I get your point. Understand the interviewer, understand the personality of the interviewer. Write down some of the questions, jot down some of the questions if you really if you're researching about the topic before interviewing them. And then you said also research about the topic. Then you said what was the final point, Veronica?
Sorry?
What was the final point?
Oh, the final point. Well, while you're doing the interview, it's really important to listen, because maybe you have really great question, but the person is speaking about something else, and you could miss out very important parts if you just stick to your questions.
Yeah, that's interesting, because well, I would say that I tried to follow all of those, and now that we're doing this interview, I'm going to come to the question of whether you're enjoying this particular interview or not, and how do you think this is going
I
so
am.
far?
It's going great. I really love it, honestly. Yeah.
All right, because there's one point I'd like to add as a journalist and as an interviewer myself. I'd like to add that because this is the mistake I often do, that when you're interviewing a person, while I do really listen quite well, and I always remember the points that that person has spoken, and I try to take away from that and therefore ask a question from that. While you're listening, you should also make a habit of jotting down the points, because I particularly forget. Like I must have, you would have given like a long answer of 5 minutes and I would forget what you said right in the end. So it's always good to write down also what a person is speaking. And the listening part, Veronica, that's very, very important in today's age and time, where we really need to sit and listen and then therefore understand the other person's story. Okay, so now I want to understand the final question from you. Since we're sitting in two different countries, you are sitting in Europe and you're sitting in Prague. I'm sitting in India, I'm sitting in Bengaluru. Is there anything, but you worked in India and I've lived in London and Europe. I want to understand from you, is there a difference in, do you see in journalism? Do you see that journalism, the way it is practiced here is different, or the interviews that are conducted in India are different? Or do you think it's different in, let's say, Prague or Europe?
That's such a great question. And I think that I would probably need to do more research on that. So I can't really say it now. I'm not so sure. Well, it's been several years since I was in India and I read your newspapers. So I can't really tell. But I think that...
Is there something particularly you picked up in India that you really like a habit of, let's say, writing newspapers or...
You mean in journalism?
Yep.
I'm not sure. I don't want to say no, but now nothing comes nothing comes on my mind. I just remember that this lady Bahar Dutt, I really loved
Yeah.
her book, and I know that she has a new book, and I think that she's so good. Like, she's internationally good, not just like she's famous in India, but I think she's also recognized elsewhere, and that's what great journalists do, you know. And I really admire her. I don't know so much about other Indian journalists, but I admire her because she's not just writing stories, but she's also
Yeah.
changing the situations, because she covered many environmental stories, which then led to for example, protecting some of those sites, or stopping, I'm not sure whether stopping mining of some of those sites. So that's just awesome, you know. It's not just theory, but it's practice, and that's very inspirational.
Right. Veronica, I was going to end this interview, but that has brought me to another question, because you made an interesting point. Because you mentioned about the Indian journalists who you like, who you follow. Do you think that, you know, we journalists and we writers and authors in the, let's say, in intellectual space, do you think that we are capable of somewhere changing or bringing about some small change in the society through the work we do? Because I've also come across, and you know, it's not a it's a reality that we have also come across journalists who do their work, but they don't really connect with people on ground, or they don't really know the reality. They just write, they're away from reality. But in a true sense, do you think that we can bring about any change, and we are capable of that?
I really hope so. And there is this trend, or I don't know, trend, but it's called solution journalism. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of journalism is covering very depressing stories. As a friend of mine who works in an Austrian national TV told me, she said that usually newspapers cover the world, everything that's extraordinary in the world, and nothing normal, you know. So it's like as if everything good or everything that works, that's never in the media, you know. And I find that horrible, because there are just the worst case scenarios all the time, like, oh, the climate change, oh, COVID, oh, so many things, but nobody covers that, I don't know, there is this guy who's doing something nice for other people, and like he's cleaning litter in front of the houses, or someone who's helping animals or old people. So it's so important to talk about these things, and that's why I also founded or created my podcast. I only release one episode per month. It's called Nature Solutionaries, and I talk to people who bring solutions. So if you ask me if journalists can change something, I think it's talking to people who bring solutions and talk about positive things, not just about negative things, because nobody wants I don't know who wants to read about negative things all the time.
Correct. That's on that note. I'm going to end that interview because that was a beautiful point that you made. That let's not only spread news, or let's not only talk about things that are bad around us. Of course, we don't live in a perfect society. We have issues, and in this COVID era, we've seen a lot of issues. But let's also talk about the positive things and the positive stories that come out in our society, and a lot of good work that's happening around us. Not only will that give us hope, it'll also give us the motivation to get up and do something. So yes, we are not just the journalists, we are as a society capable of bringing change in the world. All right, thank you so much, Veronica, for joining with us on Bharat Voice, straight from Prague today. Thank you so much. And the book that you've written, I just want you to tell the viewers just before you go that where can they get your book and where can they download it or where can they buy it?
So people can buy the book on two websites. Smashwords it's lesser known. It's an ebook platform for indie writers, but they can also buy it on Amazon, which is well known throughout the world. And you can download a sample on Smashwords, and you can also download my website, veronicaperkova.com. And I also sent a newsletter where I share some interviewing tips.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to put the link down below so that people who are listening to us and people who watch this interview later on can download your book and can go through your book and also learn the skills of interviewing. All right, Veronica, thank you so much for joining with us today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. I think it's still live.
It's still live. It's just ending.